Um, Hello, everyone. So welcome to our session today. My name is Selma Hamdani. I'll be your facilitator guide through this. As you have just seen, this session is being recorded currently. So feel free to participate within your comfort zone, or keep your cameras on or turn them off if you want to. You can also participate by using the chat or just unmuting yourself and joining the conversation. So for today's session, we have the very special participation of a couple of our fellows from Communities of Practice of Dawson. So I'll first start by sharing my screen, if that's okay with you. So we're just wondering, do people know what is a COP? A COP stands for Community of Practice, and I think the best definition I could think of for this session was that it's a community or a group of individuals that share best practices and creating knowledge to advance a particular theme of interest or particular domain of interest. And in this case, it's clearly within the theme of education. But each of the communities of practice has its own flavor, as we will see. Communities of practice have a defined goal, defined goals that include membership. So adhering to the communities, what makes it a community. They have, as I mentioned, the goal of knowledge building, sharing experiences, and I would even add advancing evidence-based practices. Close enough? Good enough? So we were discussing this idea of fellows. So we refer to our members, or to certain members, active members of communities at Dawson College, as fellows. And there's a little bit of a debate around the term fellows. It has a little bit of gendered connotation, even though we found out that in its roots it's non-gendered, so it could apply easily to a male or female participant. But we do tend to think of fellows as predominantly male figure, and we all have our stereotype of what is a fellow, or prototype in our mind of what is a fellow. So I invite you throughout the session to think of an alternative term for fellow that we could use in the future. So if you think of anything, if you want to add anything, or if you do support the term fellow, by all means, put it in the chat, and we'll get to it at the end of the session. So we thank you for your contribution. So next. At Dawson College, we have a variety of communities of practice. You can find them through this link. I'll put it in the chat as well. Some of our communities of practice is one that I'm co-coordinating with my fellow Chris. Where is he? I can't see him. It's somewhere in there. It's the Dawson Active Learning Community. Obviously, our goal is to promote active learning as a pedagogical approach. We do have other communities of practice that our presenters will talk about today, such as e-learning, which is pretty self-explanatory, online learning, kind of pedagogical approach. We have a few other communities of practice that are not represented in this session, but we will be holding another session tomorrow at 9:30. So if you look up the Saltese schedule, we have another one at 9:30 titled COP's Everywhere, or CoP-er's Everywhere. Changing Professional Development Through Communities of Practice. And there we have the leads of the communities of practice that are going to share their experiences and the journeys of the community. But today we're talking about the journeys of the members of those communities. And those are important voices to hear. So without further ado, I will give the space to Sarah. I'll stop sharing. Sarah, oh, sorry, no, Andrea. Andrea goes first. Andrea Strudensky. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, there I am. Thank you, Selma. I'm glad you said the COP, because in my head, and I just did it in the meeting I had with Sarah and Chantal yesterday, I was calling it a co-op. I don't know why, but it just seemed co-op. But anyway,
that could be another word for it.
So just very briefly, you see my slide?
Yep.
So I'm a member of the English department, and I guess since joining, so I'm just going to speak about my experience, and my experience has been a pandemic experience. So I didn't really get to explore in the ways otherwise I'm sure could be offered by this COP. But, you know, I've watched these calls for fellows come around on my email for years and years. And I kind of thought, well, I'm part of a department, and my department holds workshops, and I have my colleagues to talk to. So I kind of, you know, I'd read them and then I wouldn't act on it. But then, you know, the e-learning one came around, and just so happened that I had a lot of experience teaching online. I had taught online for the university I had been at. I had taught online for Southern New Hampshire University. I taught veterans online. And I knew about a lot of the advantages there were with to do with e-learning, and so I felt I actually had something to share. So I applied, and luckily, you know, I was accepted. But I wasn't prepared for, you know, because the experience I had, sure, I had, you know, e-learning experience, but I never had a community of practice experience, and very different things. So I remember the first meeting, I was kind of nervous, not knowing what to expect, but immediately just kind of put at ease. I only recognized one teacher, Sarah, who I'd never spoken to, but she had an office on the same floor as me. And then there was Ahmad from economics and Mark from physical therapy, right? And Annette and Raphael and Roy. What is Roy's last name?
You mean Ray?
Ray Bergeron. Ray Bergeron. Right. Ray was there. And I was just overwhelmed by how excited everyone was to welcome us into this fellowship, the kind of support we were being offered, how we were encouraged to take risks. We want to hear what you define as blended learning. Like, there was no agenda for us. There was a book and there were parameters, but really it was up to us to sort of, you know, think about what we wanted to contribute and where we saw our pedagogy going on blended learning. And that was just completely, you know, new to me in terms of these things. And they promised they'd hook us up with technology. Like, if there was some program we wanted, they'd get us the program. They had research. I remember meeting Annette and Chantal separately, like discussing an idea before the pandemic, and all these great ideas. And they were really psyched to workshop with us, you know, and there'd be these feedback meetings. And it was a real communal exchange. And I also remember in that meeting, Sarah brought up, like, what are the ethics of e-learning? So it was completely diverse. And so I remember walking back to my office after, and you know that feeling when you're kind of walking on air, and I was thinking, like, communities of practice, where have you been all my life? Like, I felt I found a place that was just a really exciting place to be part of. And I remember my office mate was like, you seem like you're really in a good mood. And I said, I feel like I'm part of a think tank. Like, I'm really part of a think tank, and that this is going to be incredibly generative and incredibly exciting. And, you know, aside from all the tremendous support, what really stood out for me as the weeks went on was getting the different perspectives. You know, you could be very insulated within your department. You know, you speak to other English teachers, you have that English teacher way of looking at things, you might have minor differences. But here I had like an economics professor, you know, really talking to me about self-assessment and introverted students and just all these different kinds of ways of thinking about pedagogy and the classroom environment and the online asynchronous environment. And it was just one of the main benefits for me, because was, you know, as opposed to when I used to just come in, do my teaching, do my office hours and leave, now I was interfacing, you know, with like people from all over, and not just teachers, but staff too, right? People that were important in the running of the college. But then of course the pandemic hit, and we were all sent home. But, you know, as hard as it was, the support just went up to a whole new level. I became, because I was part of the E-Fellowship of the Rings, I became a, my department's E-point person. So the great thing about fellowships at Dawson is they give you leave. You get one course. I taught one course less so I could concentrate on my fellowship. And then the college gave us another leave to be our department's E-point person to handle all the problems associated with online learning. And here is where I was, you know, if community means, I don't know what it's supposed to mean, I would send Raphael, you know, Chantal, everybody in that, like all the questions that people had about online learning, about Moodle, about engagement, everything was filtered through me, and I didn't know 85 to 90% of what to respond. So I would just forward it off to my cohort, my support, and sometimes immediately, sometimes within 1 hour, sometimes within 3 hours, but never more than that. And they were fielding questions from the entire college during this pandemic crisis, emergency remote learning thing. And I would get answers and more answers and check-ins and how is it going? So yeah, so it was just really heartening and really incredible. And because of my fellowship experience and because I had this team, I got to give workshops for the whole college. It was no longer just, I held drop-ins from my department, but then I, you know, with Sarah, with Ahmad, we gave, you know, how to engage students online or how to set up an asynchronous course. And then I got to learn from all these other fellows, you know, Daniel Goldsmith and the DALK people, you know, the active learning community. Like, it was just, I feel like as isolated as we were, I got to know more people within the college because of the way fellowships, the way these communities of practice function within the college. They seem to be a really cohesive, welcoming group. And I felt incredibly supported. And I went to all those DALK Friday drop-ins just to get ideas, and my e-learning meetings. Anyway, it was just really incredible. So yeah, that's just sort of to wrap it up. I mean, you can ask me more specific questions after about my personal, what I started doing and what I wanted to do, but I can say what I'm taking away from this is that I'm now a community of practice hooked addict person. And I can't imagine, like, I feel sorry, you know, for the isolation, you know, and people feeling alone. Because I know that anytime you meet another teacher and you have a talk, they're like, oh, it's so good to talk to another teacher or a staff member, you know, about what's going on. And here we have something at Dawson that actually encourages, fosters, nurtures those kinds of those kinds of culture, that kind of culture. And it has vastly improved my pedagogy and my way of thinking. And the ethos of the kind of community of practice has transcended to my classrooms, which I now see more as communities of practice. So that's it for me. Thank you. Stop share. I can go on and on.
You're muted, Selma.
I said some good things.
Oh.
I said, thank you, Andrea, for that beautiful testimony. It's really encouraging to hear how the community of practice has helped break the isolation of the pandemic. And your situation is really unique because you joined as we amidst this health crisis, education crisis, if I may say. Next, we have Sarah, and we will keep comment, and we'll open the floor for questions towards the end.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. Just a moment. Okay, so you should see a slide just with who I am on it. Is that right? Okay, good. So I'm a humanities and philosophy teacher at Dawson, and I've participated in 2 communities of practice so far, writing in the disciplines back in my first years at Dawson, and e-learning together with Andrea in this really very special pandemic circumstances. I'm going to start by talking about WID, writing in the disciplines, and I'll add a few things to what Andrea said, but I think she's covered quite a lot, and I think we have some more e-learning coming down the line as well. So just in terms of communities of practice in general and how I've found them beneficial, obviously, the fact that we can get release at Dawson to participate in these and to reflect on pedagogy is wonderful for us as teachers, right? So you have designated release time to do this. And what I like about most of the calls that I've seen and that I've applied for, because I've applied for many and I've done 2 and I'm doing another one next semester. I'm going to do the AI teaching community of practice, is they usually ask for how you're going to apply your release to a specific course or set of courses. And so it's not just theoretical pedagogy. It's not just, reading resources. It really is applying it to specific courses. And it's pedagogy that, because of the group that you're in, is relevant to the CEGEP level. Right. And I'm sure that could be adjusted to university level as well, but it works so well for us because it helps us to speak with teachers who are doing the same kind of teaching the same kind of student as us and the same levels as us, right? And also, I think Andrea mentioned this, but it's interdisciplinary. And so I find that through my 2 community of practice experiences, I've learned to see some of the strengths, but also some of the blind spots of my own discipline, and how, as a teacher, my expectations that are tied to my discipline might be hard to understand for a student who's mixing classes from all sorts of disciplines at the same time, right? And so it's really helped me to understand maybe the student situation a bit more. And also, I think what's great about the communities of practice is not only that you get this community where you can learn with other teachers and with other Dawson staff, and I'll say more about the e-learning group a little later on that level, but that you become a resource for your own department. You can even become a resource for the college. So I think it's just really fruitful for you personally, but I think it's fruitful for the community at large, right? Not just the community of practice. So that's sort of my general reflections. I'll say a little bit about WID now. So for those of you who are not that familiar with WID, it's an approach to pedagogy where you really you learn through writing. And one of the things that we did in WID is we looked at different types of writing in different disciplines because there were teachers from different disciplines in the group. But we also learned to reimagine writing within our own discipline more creatively, right? By learning from other disciplines, but also just by opening up to less formal kinds of writing, as well as the more formal kinds of writing you might do in any discipline. And I mentioned there the main resource we used, which was John Bean's Engaging Ideas. I don't know, maybe Catherine can say something about this later. I don't know if that's still the text that's being used, but it's a wonderful text. It's very practical and accessible pedagogy, and it's written for the university audience, but it's very adaptable to the CEGEP level. So it's a really wonderful book. And for those of you, most of you don't know me that well, but before I came to Dawson, I always found sort of pedagogy texts very theoretical and not very helpful. And my experience in the communities of practice at Dawson has really changed my view of pedagogy, because it's so practical, right? It's a community of practice. Right? It's not just like a community of theory. And so I find that wonderful about it. In terms of what I learned in WID. So this was many years ago, but I learned to be more explicit about my disciplinary expectations for writing with the students, and to tell them, look, you know, a humanities essay is not the same as an English essay, right? So you can't use the same kind of guidelines, and just to make it clear that different teachers are going to ask different things of them, and they need to learn the different norms. I started using a lot more writing in my classes, and a lot more short, low stakes formative writing in order to scaffold the major assignments, which are often essays, but not always, okay, in humanities and philosophy classes. And to make major assignments that weren't just formal essays, right? I included things like letters, blogs, even in some classes, I allowed them to do things like comic strips, right, for some of their bigger assignments. And so it was really wonderful because it allowed students to access the material in different ways and write in ways that were comfortable for them, right? And together with all of that, because you're increasing a lot the writing load for you as a teacher, often that means increasing the grading load. But we discussed a lot in WID how to rethink grading techniques so that you can have a lot of writing, but not have sort of an onerous grading load because of it, right? And to grade in ways that are effective and that actually help the students. So for me, it was a real game changer as a CEGEP teacher. I came from the university environment. I taught at universities before I came to CEGEP. Pedagogically speaking, I just wasn't, I didn't know how to teach CEGEP level students, and WID really changed that for me. The students were more engaged, they succeeded better in the high stakes assignments because they were scaffolded, and I just think it made me a better teacher, right? And I think if you speak to many WID fellows, you're going to hear similar things. Like most of the people I know who have gone through WID have found it incredibly helpful. Right? So that's what I want to say about WID. I'll say a few brief things about the e-learning. So like Andrea, I started the e-learning community of practice in the winter of 2020, right before the pandemic hit. And the point of the e-learning community of practice is to help with blended learning, right? So with a kind of teaching that mixes online and in-person teaching. But of course, that wasn't our experience because we all got projected fully online. And so we got to experience that community of practice with fully online courses. And you know, some of the things that the community of practice helped us with were things like various technological tools we could use, but that's not what interested me most or interests me most about e-learning. It's really about how to adapt pedagogy. I think a lot of us have seen through the pandemic that what works in person doesn't necessarily work well online and vice versa. And so it was really an occasion to rethink how to teach with new media, and well, not new, okay, but it was new that we were fully online. Of course, we've been using online aspects for quite a long time in teaching, and to have a forum of people to sort of bounce your ideas off and to learn from them, and because we were projected into this, right? We got to test our ideas very quickly to see what worked, what didn't, and to always have that group of people to discuss with. And as Andrea said, because we were so disconnected in many ways in our lives and still are during the pandemic, it was a really connecting experience. And I also feel like I got to know more people during the pandemic at Dawson than when I'm actually there in person because of the e-learning and all the workshops that we attended and gave. And in terms of my own project for e-learning, I focused on how to connect online in the classroom with the teacher, but also how to help students connect. And I've done a project on small group teaching, and I'll send the link in the chat afterwards to the portfolio. But I think the idea of a small group for learning in the classroom is similar to the idea of a small group for a community of practice, right? So when you're in these smaller groups, you can really learn from each other, and you can feel connected, and that improves your learning experience, right? And maybe I'm thinking back now to the quote that Andrea just ended with. I think that connects well with what I'm saying here. And in terms, a few last things. the support that this community of practice offered was just incredible during the pandemic and past the end of our fellowship. And it really mixes together not only teachers from different disciplines, but pedagogical counselors from OAD. So Ainat's here, but also she connected us with other people from OAD, and then Raphael Scapin from Dawson IT was incredibly helpful, but also we got connected with other people. And so I feel like it exposes you to aspects of the college that when you're just going in person and teaching your classes, you don't necessarily have as much connection with, right? And I think it's a really important community of practice because even if the pandemic will one day end, and hopefully soon, I think that online teaching in some form, hopefully in a hybrid form or something like that, is here to stay. And so as teachers, we need to keep up with the times and develop our skills. And I think this community of practice is a wonderful and practical way to do that. So that's it for me. I'm going to stop my share and pass the baton back to Selma. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very, very much. I really like the analogy that you've made, or the link you made with student group interactions and communities of practice. In a sense, we're learning just as our students are. So now I'll pass on the baton to Kathy. Oh no, that's not true. Catherine.
Yeah,
sorry.
That's good. Okay, thanks very much, Selma. Here, I'll share my screen. Might as well get into that right away. I just have to get myself out of this. Is it not? Okay, there we go. Sharing now. I've lost my faces. So there you are. Okay, we're back. Okay, so I titled this Communities of Practice only because everybody else was calling it Communities of Practice. For me, it was really about, learning. It was about communities of learning. And that's sort of what I had put in most of my slides. When I started off, I was a new teacher in the classroom and I was coming from the business sector. So for me, the business sector was really when we made presentations, we stood up at the front and we talked. It was very sort of authoritarian, top down. I was in management and that was really how it was. And I realized going into the classroom that I was unfortunately very much of a sort of a top down teacher. And I was also coming from a discipline where we were very much sort of content driven. It was all about the material that we had. So, whoops, I've already moved my slides. It was all about the material. So there was a lot of this chalk and talk, you get up there at the front and you've got to shovel this information at people. And I realized that that's not the kind of pedagogy I wanted. I wanted to understand more what teaching was really about beyond simply a disciplinary, a history perspective. I know my historical material, but how do I share that, impart that, engage students with that kind of material? So that's what sort of got me going on my Odyssey of Learning. And I use the term Odyssey because I like the word, but just to do what students do, which I tell them never to do, which is starting with a dictionary definition, but it's a long series of wanderings or adventures. And I like that, wanderings, because that's pretty much what I've been doing pedagogically for the last 5 years in particular, especially when filled with notable experiences. So there's a lovely dictionary definition. And I realized, well, that's pretty much what I have been doing. Because for me, getting engaged with these communities of practice at Dawson, first of all, finding out that they even existed, and then joining in back in 2017, my trajectory has been from active learning to e-learning to WID. And I'm actually presently in a learning communities one, which I can say a little bit about afterwards. But it was all different pieces of a puzzle, the puzzle of pedagogy, of sort of how do I learn all this kind of stuff so that I can then turn around and make teaching pedagogically sounder, pedagogically more interesting, more exciting for students. So the active learning for me, I think, was probably the best doorway into it because it spoke exactly to what I needed, what I wanted and I was looking for at that time, which was how do I engage students? how do I get myself away from being the top-down person at the front of the classroom, sort of imposing, this material down on these supposedly sponge-like little minds? How do I wake them up and get them interested and engaged? So that particular release time was just fantastic because it literally just sparked so many ideas, so many pedagogical suggestions of things I could do, and the community of people I met. And obviously that's where the term community of practice comes in, because it's the community that really makes it. All these people that are just there to answer your questions, to exchange ideas with you, to talk about all these different elements. And I won't necessarily sort of go into each one of these, but some of the main points that came out for me in terms of the active learning is when we were sort of putting responsibility onto the students, that they had to be engaged and active in their own learning. Flipped classrooms is something I love now. The fact that I send them off to read and to do stuff, and they come in, and then we work with the material, we engage with the material. That's probably my favorite word now, engagement. And there's a whole bunch of neat little activities that you can check out on the Salties website, that you can read about, that when you're exchanging and talking with colleagues. So you get all these handy little sort of toolbox ideas of what to do. And then if I add that on with the e-learning, that for me was sort of a natural extension, because in the active learning, one of my semesters is I challenged myself to get beyond the whiteboard, chalkboard environment and actually try to use a bit more technology, smart boards. I had this vision of students standing up there working on little projects together, and I wanted to be comfortable with the technology, and I was not. So I got myself into a high-tech room and I fell in love with programs like Nariva, Canvas-like things all around the classroom where students would be working as a group. And I was fortunate because this was before the pandemic. So we really had time just to think about it in a very blended way, how to add in a few things to benefit, from the online pedagogy along with the active learning. How do they complement each other? And then of course the whole pandemic immersion was like not adding it up, a notch, 120%. But at least I had a certain background then that was merging together, was syncing together. And then if I throw on the WID, and Sarah just made a whole bunch of good points about it, that to me was an added element of then how do I bring in the assignments, the assessments, the writing? How does that add on to the student engagement with the material? It sort of, to me, closed the loop a little bit. It made me sort of sit back and think, I can have them do activities online, no fancy technology, whatever, in groups, talking away. But then what do I have them do with it? What do they write? As a historian, I want them to write. I want them to write and I want them to think. But do I want them to write an academic essay? Do I want them to write an un-essay concept? Do I want them to do a graphic comic illustration? I got my first one this semester. I'm absolutely ecstatic. There's so many different genres and possibilities of how to think about this, from those small little reflective writing things that I never wasted my time with before. And suddenly I've learned how valuable and important they are. And then it brings me to my learning communities where I can take all of this and I can then work with Chris Bourne in political science. And I had been working on joining our two classes together thematically for students within a profile. So it's really a building block of things that are just going on and on, they're joining together, they're linked. And as we've all mentioned, the benefits of the learning, obviously, with the release, you get a chance to sit there and actually talk with people, learn the theory and the practice, the time off to immerse yourself. You don't have to go to the library or Amazon and find a book yourself and stumble your way through, what's the literature saying. But for me, the biggest benefit is all the new ideas that came out of this. It took me completely away from the chalkboard and into all these new activities and assessments, both the positive and the not so successful parts of it, going to the show and tells when we have our community of practice sessions on Friday afternoons, hearing these ideas. I've gotten such amazing ideas, and a shout out to Andrea there for the Instagram, which I used for the first time this semester, Perusal, which I used for the first time, and a physics guy told me all about it. And they've worked so successfully. So it's that consultative can't even pronounce it, group, where you can go and you can talk to people about what works and what doesn't work. And you can work through the problem and you can get new ideas, or you can scrap it if you find it doesn't work. So having those kind of like-minded, interested people in your pedagogy makes all the difference. And that sort of can sum up, I guess, in a nice way to conclude all my alliterations of C's. Commiseration, because sometimes you're there and, you know, something just didn't pan out and we're all commiserating with each other and trying to, in the conversation, take it a step further. And probably the beauty of these communities of practice is that very often at the end of the semester, well, there are drinks, there are cocktails, and we get together with a drink. And to my chagrin, I will actually mention that we did get together with a glass of wine, some of us, at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, which sounds terribly, I know, that sounds terribly loose in a way. But you're there with a like-minded group of people. And yeah, you talk about the ideas about pedagogy and about teaching, and it's validating. You're all in this together and you're working on this together, and 3 steps forward, 1 step back, but everybody is very supportive. So I can only speak incredibly highly of communities of learning and practice together. I think it's made a world of difference in my pedagogy. And I know certainly within my department, we're all actively encouraging each other to participate in these as much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And as Kathy mentioned, yes, there's also food in these events.
Ooh, yeah.
Pre-pandemic, you were a resident baker.
Well, I have banana bread now. I have bananas in my freezer that I have nowhere to use them for. So I'm looking forward to the day that we have our Friday afternoons that we can bring food in as well.
All right. Last but not least, and I will not make a mistake this time, we have Kathy Roy.
That's okay. I answered to Catherine and all kinds of other things. So Miss, that's my my favorite. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Whoops. So I'll try not to be repetitive going last, but I do think that even though there are threads of similarities, our voyages, our journeys are relatively different. I'm just going to, well, the same and different at the same time. How do I do this? Present what's over here. So I'm going to shrink down the chat box so it doesn't distract me and you guys too. Yeah, whoops. How do I go back? Anyway, you don't need to see that my cover page. I'm Kathy Roy. I'm from Physiotherapy Technology. I've been teaching. This is my 6th year teaching. So I was a relatively new teacher when I was introduced to the learning communities or the communities of practice. And I say was introduced, I'm using a passive voice there because I was sort of roped in, I have to say. And if anyone is, thinking about or being pressured, I say, go for it. I didn't actually know when I went to the first meeting what a community practice was or what I was getting into. It was sort of a series of circumstances that led to being drawn into or recruited for the UDL community, let's say, because I have I have interests in accessibility coming from a rehab physiotherapy background, and we were having specific issues with inclusion and stage with our students, and we brought in Effie, who's involved in that community, to one of our staff meetings, and then I got an email saying, oh, they asked if you wanted to sit in on one of their meetings. I thought, oh, okay, I'll go. I'll see what this is all about. But I didn't know there was release involved. I had no clue what I was doing. But anyway, it's one of those happy accidents, kind of the same way I came to teaching. But so once I arrived, I realized it was a very good place for me to be. There was a level of structure and support and sharing that was very validating and helpful for me, just to open, take down barriers and open my mind to different possibilities and seeing different ways of doing things than I had experienced in my own learning journey, if you will. So yeah, the difference, I guess, between UDL, it's Universal Design for Learning, and a lot of the other communities that we've heard about and the community of practice, is that it was quite a bit more introspective until the sort of big share at the end, where we would, you know, have the whole community, past and future fellows, all together, and inviting other members of the community. A couple of deans came to that presentation that first term. It's a much more introspective journey, just because it really looks at classroom environment, roles of teacher versus student. There's a lot of thinking about relationship and transparency, accessibility, inclusion are kind of, that's what we're looking for. And so it asks you to kind of go deep and look into your own biases, your own, you know, your own journey, your own learning journey, and how that has affected your choices as a teacher. So I think that that's the reason that it starts introspective, and that worked for me because I'm naturally a very shy person. And you can see there's no one's here from UDL, but there's a lot of teachers from the French department involved in managing that community. So there's always coffee and croissants. I don't know where they get their their little budget for those activities, but it's a draw. It's definitely a draw. But the whole tenet was flexibility, and it taught me flexibility. What it brought to my students, really, because I realized that, my thinking is very, not very linear, very tangential, and sometimes I can lose some of them in my train of thought or in my learning materials. And it really made me go back to my learning materials and rework everything to make sure that it was accessible and that my students' energy was going where I wanted it to, towards the learning and not towards finding and, navigating my resources and my teaching. So really big benefits for me, for my students. I just put this quote here, this song, "I don't care how you get here, just get here if you can." And that's what UDL was for me, is learning to be flexible with students, with myself, with all of our kind of learning processes. So that's more or less what UDL kind of represents. This is a couple, I won't go into a lot of detail, but it touched so much of what I was doing in the classroom that, our sort of mission at the beginning of the term was sort of two main issues with inclusion accessibility to tackle through the community of practice, which I covered in this video. This is all linked up, so if anyone's curious about what this community does, but at the end, it was so hard to narrow down what I'd done, because I felt like the design principles kind of permeated everything I touched in my classroom. And so I actually made a G site, and this is the G site, just with little clips and demos of all the changes that I made to a lot of the learning materials that I was using, and just the ways that I was engaging with my students and how my pedagogy had changed. And then, fast forward a year or so, and then I knew what a learning community was, and I had been to several DLC events, and I knew what that was about, and I was already, I drunk the Kool-Aid. I was, full on active learning. And if UDL was sort of introspective and very focused on kind of the relationship and philosophy of teaching, then DLC, I really felt, gave me sort of a balance with that, so that, I was able to then put some science and, the art and science of learning, and be able to kind of embed that into the UDL philosophy. And it was a much more public journey, and I figured that out in the first week or two. I think we did with Selma in the first 2 weeks that I started an intro to DALC 101, and I can't tell you how nervous I was that day. And I think only 2 people showed up, but I thought, oh my God, what am I getting myself into? I'm going to be giving presentations and facilitating workshops, you know, all the time. And I now I say it's my aversion therapy, because it really forced me to kind of come out of my shell and build up my confidence in these kinds of things, so that I can participate in these kinds of activities and you know, offer what I have to bring. And same as the rest of you. So in midstream, we'll call it midstream DLC on that journey, you know, that we had the flood, and that's why I put, you guys see my emojis, my Bitmojis. This is Ahmad's influence. I know several of you also know Ahmad, and the Bitmojis probably you've seen before. So, you know, if that storm was there, I really felt like DLC was my lifeboat. I felt like I had that support that maybe some of my colleagues, you know, didn't, and that having that and being in that lifeboat allowed me to feel like I could reach out and be a support and sort of, you know, throw dinghies or invite other people into my lifeboat, rather than just sort of trying to figure everything out on our own. And projects are still in progress. I've sort of, I won't talk too much in detail, but I've been really working on this overlap between, you know, between e-learning actually and my project, which is case study method. And I started out, you know, with a very specific idea of branching scenarios, and I worked on getting a new software into the college, which is, you know, in progress. And but my project sort of broadened to general case study method, how we do that online in the classroom. So that'll be published on the DLC webpage, the new and coming DLC website. So so that's it. So I'm not going to talk too much longer. And Selma started with what is a COP, so I'll finish with what is a COP for me. You know, win-win-win, I said, because it's a win for me. I feel it's a win for the students, and it's a win for the greater community, because I do feel there's influence and kind of trickle down and discussions that are born from these, you know, this kind of expansion. Responsibility and support, I won't go into that too much, because I think it was covered lots in the other presentations. I call it DIY professional development, because I really feel like and it's the time. So it's the support and the community, but also having the time to implement, because I feel like, you know, we go to these conferences, we get all these really neat ideas, but then, you know, the semester hits and we just don't have time to implement them, to really, you know, dig deep and figure out how to make it work in our own classrooms. And that's where, you know, the release is just really so important. And I just put a little yellow heart for, you know, DLC, UDL, Match Made in Heaven, because it took me 2 or 3 years to figure out how they fit together. And I really feel like they do. It's not, it seemed like a paradox at the beginning. And I realized that they really do complement each other. And I will be doing a Salties fellowship, for lack of a better term, because that's what it's called over there as well, starting next year. So I'm really excited about that. And I feel like my involvement in these communities has opened lots of doors for me. And that's it. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Kathy, and thank you, everyone. By the way, I put up some links to Kathy's documents and video in the chat. So if anybody's interested and want to keep them, feel free to save the chat. I think you have an option there. So now we open the floor to questions, comments, discussions. Yes, Natalie.
I'll be the first one.
Thank you.
I'll try to break the ice. That was very, very interesting. I worked at Dawson with Ray Bourgeois and Dr. Neville Gurudara. I don't know if any of you were there at that time. So I know Dawson quite well. And that was one of the reasons why I joined today's, but I don't know any of you. It's like, I don't know anyone anymore. So, and Shirley Jorgensen, I worked closely with her. and I was the coordinator of the Student Success Action Plan way back when I started. So, and I think it's very important about this COP because a lot of the teachers, and even at John Abbott, they come, they have never taught, they have never stepped in a classroom, but they know their content very well. But when it comes for pedagogy, it can be very different and challenging. A little bit with my background, it was very different because I had my my bachelor's degree and wanted to go and teach at the high school level. Yeah, I wouldn't do that anyways today. But so in those days, you needed to go and get a diploma that offered at McGill in pedagogy, how to teach. It was a certificate, diploma in the teaching of mathematics in high school. So you learned about pedagogy, that's all. So when you came into the classroom, you felt, you know, much more equipped, but you still had challenges at high school level. If you could teach high school level, you could teach almost at any level, but it was very challenging. And I think that to engage more people, what you're doing, my question to you is the following. Is it at all possible that all the time, okay, you get some release time, but you're doing like this action research, it has something to it, and I don't know how to grasp it because I don't know much more about it, but can it be recognized, or can any credits be granted towards the master's, the master's, what's it called again? The master's in teaching that's offered for teachers at SageMap? Has anyone ever looked into that? Because I know it's a long program, and if there are credits that could be recognized from this practice, then they can make that journey a little bit shorter, because it's very relevant what you're doing. Question.
That's an excellent point, Natalie. We've thrown around the idea of some certification, but it's not quite related to the master. Well, we haven't made the link to the masters in education, but I think it's what you're referring to, maybe more like a pro forma type of accreditation. Yeah.
Yes, pro forma. Yeah.
Does anybody want to add anything to that?
It's so practical, and any program you have practice, right? I mean, you have, I don't know, I'm thinking of a paramedic care. The students have to go on a stage, do some practice. I think there's something, and it would really, you know, motivate others to get into that community because it's so important.
That's a great point. I know, Kathy, you've taken some Performa courses, and Julia, you might know a bit more about this as well from OED
Yeah, I can speak. Sorry, I can speak a little bit to this because I did a Performa certificate, and I've done pieces of it kind of, you know, throughout and simultaneously as I was working through this community practice. And I wouldn't say there's a lot of overlap, but I feel like the Performa experience is the ideas. It's more of it's not superficial. It does go deep, but sometimes, you know, and the applications are good, but sometimes it's less applied. Like, that's why I called this a DIY professional development, because it really, the accountability in the learning communities is to produce something, to do something that you can hold up at the end of the term and say, this is, and some of the assignments in Performa were that, but not all of them. And there was a lot of overlap and parallel, but also sometimes I felt like in the two communities that I did, there's a parallel course. So there's instructional strategies in the active learning classroom, which I took before coming into DLC, which probably gave me a good foundational understanding and helped. But then I really feel like I implemented the stuff I learned in that course through DLC and went so much deeper in my learning and understanding through the DLC. Same thing with inclusion, even more so. So I did it the other way around. I did my UDL before taking the inclusion class at Performa, and it actually found the Performa course quite, and don't quote me on this, but quite frustrating because it was very surface level compared to what I already knew about inclusion. and was implementing in my classroom. So I felt like I could teach that course. And it, not in a cocky way. It was just, you know, yeah. So that's to say, you know, in terms of it from a user experience and perspective, I'm not saying one should, you know, what should happen because of that, and maybe my experiences are different than others, but I'll leave it at that. Okay.
I guess the practical aspect of communities of practice kind of gives you a hands-on, deeper understanding of the les enjeux of the community. Interesting. Did you want to add something, Chris? Born?
Well, I have a couple of questions. This is, first of all, this is great presentations, everyone. Most of these initiatives I was somewhat aware of or vaguely familiar with, and had wanted to apply for most of them at various points in time, but you know, there's only so many hours in a day. Although, as Catherine mentioned, she and I were working on this learning community, effectively community of practice this semester, and both pedagogically speaking, but also for breaking down isolation. Absolutely amazing. And I also appreciated the what Natalie raised about new teachers and about how communities of practice could be very helpful for people who are brand new to CEGEP. I'm particularly cognizant of that because in my new role, one of my jobs is going to be helping to work with people who might be brand new, straight out of a master's, or not having experience at the CEGEP level. Now, the question I have though is, and I hope it's not an uncomfortable one, but is that, you know, the notion and clearly the value of the resources, financial resources, and course release time is demonstrable in terms of the amazing things you both been able to accomplish for your own practice, but also for the broader community. I'm coming into a situation where I don't know what sort of resources are available, but think that there's already, oh, we'd love to start community practice on this. So I'm just wondering about how, and I don't want you to undermine your own work because clearly they're so valuable things, but if there's been any reflection on how it might work without the extra money for the extra time, or if there have been maybe examples where that worked, have there been examples maybe where something was started and then was no longer funded, but it was able to carry on because of a really good grounding? I'm really just looking for anything that has maybe worked in the past.
Does anyone want to take that? Chris?
I apologize in advance for the question.
No, it's okay. It's a very valid one. Chris, you want to?
Yeah, I can answer that. I mean, the Dawson active learning community emerged out of a number of things, but you know, at the beginning, so the fellows program that is part of the DALC now was not always there. So I think there are a couple of key things to developing the. I think good communities of practices are emergent phenomena in that if you can find these seeds and fertilize the seeds and nurture the seeds, you know, I think sometimes it's frustrating because it's a little slower. This is going back to, I think, Andrea, your quote at the end of your slides, right? You know, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go, you know, far, it takes time, and you know, you can seed communities of practice by identifying particular you know, high energy people that are just chomping at the bit to try to find something or opportunities, and then, you know, even if you seed them with a little bit of money for food, right? So croissants and coffee, you know, something like that attracts people. You know, every second Friday afternoon, I noticed you guys do this often. You guys talk about pedagogy. Do you want to just meet regularly? I'll supply the coffee and the donuts or the croissants, and you know, and you can nurture it. So I think there are ways of you know, starting these communities of practice either around people or around ideas. So, you know, WID formed around, you know, Ian's energy and you know, the idea of writing across the discipline. So there was you know, there were these kind of, I'm looking for a word, I'm not getting it, you know, these hot spots and particular resource people. And I think you can fan those flames and provide, you know, support services, and then they can be formalized. I think that's how it happened at Dawson. I think that's something that's important to underline, is that, you know, it's a slow process and it needs nurturing. It's not something that, you know, it's not like you can just lay down a bunch of sod and water it and it just magically takes root and is a beautiful green lawn from the beginning. Don't know if that answers the question completely, but certainly you can do it. It takes someone or something to latch on to, right? A focal point. Sometimes that can come out of a problem, a crisis, right? Maybe it's, you know, I don't know, in a particular program or department, a very specific need or a problem, but it can also be around strengths. So I wouldn't just look for negatives, but how you can build those positives up.
It was very helpful, Chris. I put it in the chat, but there's the idea of DAO. We'll bring a pot of coffee and some free food. That's if we were going to be doing it anyway. I worked in grad school, you know, and I don't, you know, why wouldn't it carry work? That's brilliant simplicity.
Yeah, and places. So places are another thing. You know, the faculty lounge, at Dawson, I think had that as its initial start. So places and food, people. Yep.
Annette, do you want to add something to that? And then...
Triangle, places, food, and people, I think.
Yep. I just wrote that down.
Yeah, you wrote that down. What Chris was saying reminded me, actually, I was just speaking to Chantal, preparing for tomorrow's community of practice leads meeting. And she was recounting how the e-learning community of practice started in, you know, years ago with a project. So it was a project that she sustained, you know, her and colleagues for a few years before they managed to get an ECQ grant, actually, in 2019 for the first cohort. And then after that, it became, the funding was more, it was from the administration, I think now, but still it's, you know, that's something that we're struggling with at Dawson. It's great that we have so many communities of practice, but also it poses a challenge in terms of the resources that are available, and we're still negotiating that. And Chris was saying that there was sometimes it comes up from a certain problem or a challenge within a department, and I think that's exactly how UDL started, where teachers in the French department had reached out to Effie specifically, who had experience with working with students with special needs or learning disabilities, and they did all this research together on UDL, and it sort of morphed into a community of practice. So there are different ways to reach this, and this. You know, the community, each community is a little bit different. So I find it, to address the previous comment, a little bit difficult to see how each one of them or all of them could fit inside a program like the Performa, a master's program would be a little bit tricky, you know, in terms of reaching the same kind of, but they're not all the same. They're not interchangeable. They don't work the same way, and they are born in different ways, I think.
It's a great point, Anna. They're born in different ways. They have the ultimate goal, or it all live under the umbrella of improving education, learning, etc. But they come at it from different ways. So all roads lead to Rome, kind of way. And Catherine, you want to add something?
That's a good historical connection there. All roads lead to Rome. I like that score. I guess this is listening to everybody and even looking at my own background there, sort of community of learning or practice in active learning, and then whoops, I move on to e-learning, and then I mutate into something else. And everybody has different communities that they're associated with. And I guess, and I see myself personally, how they've all been connected together. One is added on to the other. But if I've only taken one community of learning, like I find doesn't that sort of leave us in these silos? So I guess my interest and my question is, how do we facilitate more cross-germination between these communities of learning so that everybody realizes the benefit? The person who doesn't want to go and take 4 or 5 or can't or isn't interested. Like, I'm listening to Kathy with the UDL and I realize I know very little about that. I would love to talk to more people in that community of practice to see how this could add on to my knowledge. Is it something that I would be interested in doing or not? But I guess I want to get out of my individual silos and more cross-fertilization. And I'm wondering how we can facilitate that or take that to the next step.
I'm just jumping in. I think the show and tells and the communities getting together, I think that's what exposed me to other communities of learning. When you're invited to a different.
But at the same time, like when I see some of the show and tell, sometimes it's like, oh, okay, the DALC community, the active learning community is doing a show and tell this Friday.
No,
So
but I think when you're invited, like when your fellows, like we get called, like Chantal will say, you know, do you want to present at DALC's show and tell? Do you know what I mean? Like
okay.
the communities have like a collective show and tell. They should. I'm saying we should every couple times a semester have a collective show and tell where all the communities can get together and talk about what they've been doing.
Yeah.
That is indeed a great idea, Andrea. I think we've toyed with that idea as well in the past, where we talked about a fair or like a showcasing of fellows and of communities. The cross-pollination of communities is really important, and I think it seems to be happening already. For lack of a better word, organically, where people just migrate from one to the next through, as Andrea was saying, the show and tells. You learn about a new community, a different community than the one you're in, and you realize, oh, this is another piece of the puzzle for my learning experience. I see lots of hands, so take it away, Sarah.
So this is, I don't know if it's a question or a concern. So Natalie mentioned how useful these could be to new teachers. And as someone who's done a couple of communities of practice, I find once you've done one, it seems to be sort of, you seem to know how to apply to get into the others. But I sometimes feel like there's a lot of cross-pollination. And for people who haven't been able to do any and keep applying, it seems like people who have already done communities of practice are privileged, and I've profited from that privilege, right? So I'm kind of shooting myself in the foot here, but I've sort of heard it in my department that there's a lot of people who would just like to get into a first one, and that new teachers, maybe the information isn't, I don't know, they're not exposed to it enough. And perhaps part of our responsibility for people who have done it is to share it more with our department and new teachers in our department. But I wonder if that's in the way that people are chosen, whether that's a consideration, not only people who have done other communities of practice and can contribute in that way, but people who haven't done any, and precisely because of that, bringing them into the community would be valuable. So I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. Yeah. Sort of a comment more than a question.
And a very valid one. I see Anat's hand. If you want to take.
Yeah, sorry, Chris, I just want to reply specifically to that because I've been on selection committees, so it is a selection committee and we do have a rubric, and previous participation in a previous community of practice does not figure into that. So no, we actually do try and look for a breadth of departments. So departments that haven't been participated yet are always interesting. I mean, of course, other factors come into play, but participation in other communities of practice is not necessarily a deciding factor, whereas people who come from departments that we haven't had previously is of interest.
Thanks for clarifying that.
So can I just jump in on that one? Because this is something that we've talked about. So we've talked about this a fair amount over time. You know, the communities get together once in a while talk and to share. And we haven't done, I think, as good a job as we would like to coordinate ourselves. But we've had this discussion, and that's a question that I will bring to tomorrow morning's session, because that's where the leads will be talking. And I think that's a hugely important one, right? It's one that we could undermine ourselves by ignoring that fact or that perception. I mean, I think it's somewhere between fact and perception. It's a bit of both. But I'll bring it to our session tomorrow morning. That's a really good point. And it is something we've talked about. I'm not sure I know we haven't gotten there yet, but it's really important.
I see a few more hands. Chris and Natalie, did you want to add something about this? Or
it actually is sort of on this, as Sarah, just before Sarah articulated, I was having some very similar thoughts, and it's good that the rubric explicitly doesn't include kind of this, but sometimes people who are good at applying for stuff are good at applying for stuff, and they sort of find success that way. And yeah, I mean, I wonder if part of this, or rather, in the various ways in which the learning is shared, it does seem that the department level or the discipline level is really quite relevant for that, because that's where a lot of kind of decisions about what goes into the classroom and ways to get made. So it's great to have the kind of interdisciplinary and learning from, and I've profited greatly from interacting with teachers in other disciplines. But when you get back together as your discipline, and those, on the curriculum committees or other things like that, I wonder if there might be some way, of course, depending on the community of practice, but to have a more almost explicit mandate in certain cases to engage with one's department. So at least the others in the department could benefit from it, even if they either applied and didn't get in, or just weren't so inclined to be fully participants, but could still get it from one of their kind of direct peers. Really just a very brainstormy kind of idea.
so you're saying that the fellows can be like ambassadors sent back to their departments.
Yeah, and so if I had done one, and we did this in this political science course, then whenever I'm speaking with my political science colleagues about about pedagogy, and of course, I mean, this is with the social science lens, but science as well. Revision is coming up, and these are big deals, and so there will be engagement with competencies is happening over the next couple of years in meaningful ways. So this is maybe another opportunity for all of these, is how do you get that more explicitly in when departments and disciplines are going to be talking about their competencies.
We're nearing the end, but we can hear from Natalie and anybody else. We can continue this conversation in Gathertown if you want. Go ahead, Natalie.
Thank you. Just a little bit of what Sarah was saying. I mean, one of the questions that I was asking myself is like, who gets chosen to be participating in this COP? What are the criteria? Should the new teachers that come into this wonderful world of teaching be privileged or have priority? We have new teacher orientation at John Abbott, and I don't know if you have something very similar at Dawson. Could that be shared at one of those events to inform the new teachers of these opportunities? Because I think that would be important, especially for them. You're just coming into this field of teaching, and sometimes you don't always get the mentoring that you might be in a big program. It happened to me in the past. So, and mentoring, I mean, it's very important, but sometimes you're just in a big program, you're teaching math, you're coming in for this course, that course. It's very difficult. So that was my final comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think Einat can say something about that.
Yeah, really quickly, because I know our time is up, I think. But we do have new faculty orientation at Dawson. It started a few years back, and we do mention and showcase this communities of practice. Our original idea was to do a second day follow-up where we have the communities of practice come in and speak and showcase possibly what they do, but it's really hard to get teachers together, especially at Dawson. We have no common time for all the teachers because of our space issue. it's really hard to get the teachers together, the new teachers together for the first one. So the second one is like near impossible, but we'll figure something out.
This has been really great. Sadly, we are at the end of our session, if not a little bit beyond. So thank you very much, everyone, for participating. Thank you to our speakers. This recording will be available on Saltese's YouTube channel, so look for it. And if anybody is interested in keeping the information that was in the chat, please do so before we close. And I think we can even save this somewhere. Thank you and happy Saltese. And if you want to learn more about COPs, we have a session tomorrow. I put the link in the chats. Tomorrow morning, 9:30. I wish we could offer coffee and croissants, but will be virtual ones.
Thank you.
Thank you, Selma.
Thanks a
All
lot.
right, Selma.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
See you later.
Thank you, everyone.